Here I am, again, in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm continuing with my defense of Family 35, or my presentation of it. This time I want to talk about canards. A canard is a falsehood that has gained the status of accepted truth within a discipline. Once upon a time, a chap named Hermann von Soden affirmed that his kr was a revision of his kx, probably done in the 12th century. The information available in his own 4-volume work demonstrates that affirmation to be false. Nonetheless, that falsehood gained the status of accepted truth within the discipline of New Testament textual criticism. It became a canard. Consider the following statement by Kershaw Lake. Quote, "Writers on the text of the New Testament usually copy from one another the statement that Chrysostom used the Byzantine or Antiochian text. But directly any investigation is made, it appears evident, even from the printed text of his works, that there are many important variations in the text he quotes, which was evidently not identical with that found in the manuscripts of the Byzantine text." End quote. Having myself spent an occasional year in the arcane halls of academia, I have observed that the uncritical repetition of things that everyone knows is really rather common in almost any discipline. New Testament textual criticism is no exception, as Lake observed above. I take it that Hermann von Soden was the first to formally identify his kr as a distinct text type, the R standing for revision, since he considered it to be a revision based on his kx. Well, now, by definition, a revision is perpetrated by a specific someone at a specific time and in a specific place. Within our discipline, I gather that revision and recension are synonyms. Here, Hort, quote, "The Syrian text must in fact be the result of a recension in the proper sense of the word, a work of attempted criticism performed deliberately by editors and not merely by scribes," end quote. It is not my wont to appeal to Fenton John Anthony Hort, but his understanding of recension is presumably correct. A recension is produced by a certain somebody or group at a certain time in a certain place. If someone wishes to posit or allege a recension or revision, and do so responsibly, he needs to indicate the source and supply some evidence. So upon what basis did von Soden claim that his kr, that I call Family 35, was a revision of his kx and created in the 12th century? Had he really paid attention to the evidence available in his own magnum opus, Die Schriften des Neuen Testaments in German, he could not have done so. That's 4 volumes, okay? It's a 4-volume work. He could not have done so, at least not honestly. But was he honest? At least with reference to John 7:53 through 8:11, that's the PA I've talked about. I think not. He claims to have collated some 900 manuscripts for that pericope, and on that basis posited 7 families or lines of transmission, and even reproduced an alleged archetypal form for each one. Hodges and Farstad took his word for it and reflected his statement of the evidence in their critical apparatus. And I reflect the Hodges-Farstad apparatus in mine for that pericope, for lack of anything better, except that I guarantee the witness of M7, that's my Family 35, based on my personal examination of Robinson's collations. Some years ago now, Maurice Robinson did a complete collation of 1,389 manuscripts that contained the pericope adultera. And I had William Pierpont's photocopy of those collations in my possession for 2 months, spending most of that time studying those collations. As I did so, it became obvious to me that von Soden regularized the data, arbitrarily creating the alleged archetypal form for his first four families. That's M1, M2, M3, and M4. If they exist at all, they are rather fluid. His M5 and M6 do exist, having distinct profiles, but they are a bit squishy, with enough internal confusion to make the choice of the archetypal form to be arbitrary. In contrast to the above, his M7, that I call Family 35, has a solid, unambiguous profile. The archetypal form is demonstrable, empirically determined. Once upon a time, I was led to believe that von Soden's work was reasonably reliable. This was important because his work is basic to both the Hodges, Farstad, and Robinson-Pierpont editions of the majority text. However, the Text und Textwert collations demonstrate objectively that not infrequently von Soden is seriously off the mark. With reference to von Soden's treatment of Codex 223, K.W. Clark wrote, quote, "Furthermore, our collation has revealed 62 errors in 229 readings treated by von Soden," end quote. If you divide 62 by 229, you get 27% in error. And 27% in error is altogether too much. And what is true of manuscript 223 may be true of other manuscripts as well. Please stop and think about that for a minute. 27% in error cannot be attributed to mere carelessness or even sloppiness. Mere carelessness should not exceed 5%. It really does look like the reader is being misled deliberately, and that is dishonest. H.C. Hoskier was not entirely mistaken in his evaluation. Furthermore, how could KR be a revision of KX if KX does not even exist? Soden himself was perfectly well aware that there is no KX in the pericope. H.C. Hoskier's collations prove that there certainly is no KX in the Apocalypse. We are indebted to the Institut für Neutestamentliche Textforschung for their Text und Textwert series. A careful look at their collations indicates that there probably is no KX anywhere. Take, for example, the Text und Textwert volumes on John's Gospel, chapters 1 through 10. 11 and on has not been done yet. They examined a total of 1,763 manuscripts, that's including fragments, for 153 variant sets, and included the results in the two volumes. Pages 54 through 90 of Volume 1 contain, quote, groupings according to degrees of agreement, agreeing more often with each other than with the majority text, end quote. Only one group symbol is used, precisely KR. The first representative of the family, manuscript 18, heads a group of about 120 manuscripts, but all subsequent representatives have only a KR. Of the 120, the last 6 show 98% of agreement. All the rest are 99%, that's 74 manuscripts, or 100%, 40. I would say that Family 35 in the Gospels has over 250 representatives. The ranking here is based on only 153 variant sets. But just see what happens below. The group headed by manuscript 18 numbers 120 and is the only one that receives a group symbol, being by far the largest. But are there any other groups of significant size? I will now list them in descending order, starting with those that have 40 or more. You should see this list now on the screen. There are, in fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 or 11 groups the groups are identified by the number of a given manuscript. So manuscript 2103 has 52 manuscripts, 318 has 44, 961 has 42, and so on down. You'll have to look at what's on the screen to see the coherence. Looking at the coherence, you'll see that groups 961, 1576, 1247, 2692, 1328, 1618, and 2714, they all belong to family 35, over KR. Which leaves only 2103, 318, and 1058 that are not. As we look at the coherence column, we note that 961, 1576, 1247, and 2692 are the same. And upon inspection, we verify that the lists of manuscripts are virtually identical. So we may add 40 manuscripts to the 120 already designated as KR. Groups 1618 and 2714 have heavy overlap, and 1328 has partial overlap. So we may add at least another 20. Now let us look at the three that remain: 2103, 318, and 1058. Remembering that the threshold for KR was 98%, we note that over half of the 2103 and 318 groups fall below it. So those groups are not solid. The group 1058 fares better, but almost half fall below 99%. All of the family 35 groups are heavily 99% or 100%. It may be relevant to observe that manuscript 1058 is probably fringe family 35. So I ask, where is KX? Nowhere in that evidence. So now let's look at a list of the groups that fall between 25 and 39 in descending order. Here again we have a group of about 12. The lead manuscript number is given 1638, 710, 763, and so on. You'll see that on the screen. Guess what? They are all family 35 except for one, group 710. A glance at the coherence gives the clue. If 710 is really a group at all, it is rather squishy. The last 6 lists are all but identical, and there is considerable overlap among the others. Even so, a few more manuscripts can probably be added to the family 35 list. And an examination of the remaining 300 plus or minus groups, depending on where the cutoff point is placed, will doubtless add even more. And so on. So where is KX? Did you get that? There are over 300 different groups, supposedly within the Byzantine mass of KX, according to von Soden. There is no KX. Gentle hearer, allow me to whisper in your ear, there is no KX. It only existed in von Soden's imagination. Obviously, KR cannot be a revision of something that never existed, all right? KR cannot be a revision of something that never existed. And then there is the matter of demonstrated independence. By definition, a revision or recension is dependent upon its source. If there is no demonstrable source anywhere in the extant or available materials, which for the New Testament are really rather considerable, then it is dishonest, irresponsible, and reprehensible to allege a revision or a recension. And then there is the matter of demonstrated antiquity. There are hundreds of places where family 35 is joined by early witnesses. Early, that's 5th century, 4th century, 3rd century, 2nd century, where there is variation but without pattern. The crucial point here is the lack of pattern. Without pattern, there is no dependency. There being no dependency, F35 is of necessity ancient. There are over 30 lines of transmission within the Byzantine book, and Family 35 is demonstrably independent of them all. But why then do we not have any F35 manuscripts from before the 11th century? Well, why do you suppose that with few exceptions, only Family 35 manuscripts have the lections marked in the margin? Could it be because the Greek-speaking communities used them in their worship services and for reading at communal meals? And what effect does constant use have on any book? I suggest, for the calm, cool, and collected consideration of all concerned, that any worthy manuscript would be in constant use and therefore could not survive for centuries. Copies that were considered to be of unacceptably poor quality would be left on the shelf to collect dust, and they are the ones that survive. However that may be, I invite attention to the following list of Family 35 manuscripts from the 11th century. The manuscripts within parentheses appear to be marginal members of the family or are mixed. Now I'm just going to read these because this is important that you understand. There are 18 of them. Manuscript 35 comes from the Aegean area. Manuscript 83 is in Munich. Manuscript 125 in parentheses is in Wien. 476 in parentheses is in London. 516 in parentheses is in Oxford. 547 is in Caracalla. 585 in parentheses is in Modena. 746 is in Paris. 1164 in parentheses is in Patmos. 1384 is in Andros. 1435 is in Vatopediu. 1483 in parentheses is in Megistis Lavras. 1841 in parentheses is in Lesbos. 1897 is in Jerusalem. 2253 is in Tirana. 2587 is in the Vatican. 2723 is in Trikala. And 2817 in parentheses is in Basel. To begin, we note that there are 18 manuscripts listed, and each in a distinct location. Of course, some of those presently in Western Europe may have been acquired from the same monastery. Okay. Further, since they are internally distinct, they represent as many exemplars. Okay. Since exemplars must exist before any copies made from them of necessity, and since most, maybe all of those exemplars must also have been based on distinct exemplars in their turn, even if someone were to allege a recension, it could not have been perpetrated later than the 8th century. Simply impossible. Surely, because one must account for the geographical distribution. Did someone concoct the F35, Family 35 archetype in the 8th century? Who? Why? And how could it spread around the Mediterranean world? There are Family 35 manuscripts all over the place. Jerusalem, Sinai, Athens, Constantinople, Trikala, Helabrita, Okrida, Patmos, Karditsa, Rome, Sparta, Meteora, Benedict, Lesbos, and most monasteries on Mount Athos that represent different denominations. But the Byzantine bulk controlled at least 60% of the transmissional stream. Family 35 equals about 16% of the total. How could something concocted in the 8th century spread so far, so fast, and in such purity? How did it inspire such loyalty? Everything that we know about the history of the transmission of the text answers that it could not and did not. It is simply impossible that Family 35 could have been concocted at any point subsequent to the 4th century. The loyalty with which Family 35 was copied, the level of loyalty for Family 35 being much higher than that for any other line of transmission, indicates that it was never concocted. It goes back to the original. We need to take up the question of level of loyalty and the quality quotient, comparing various lines of transmission on that basis. For example, why is it that an average Family 35 manuscript will have only one variant for every 2 pages of printed Greek text? That's an average one. The good ones go for pages. While an average Byzantine bulk manuscript will have at least 3 variants per page, and an average Alexandrian manuscript will have over 15 per page. Does that suggest anything about attitude? About taking one's work seriously? By attitude, I mean specifically toward the exemplar being copied. Was it an object of respect or reverence? And then there is the silence of history. Although I have touched on this elsewhere, it deserves specific attention. Allow me to borrow from my treatment of the Lucianic recension, which is in the Identity of New Testament text. John William Bergen gave the sufficient answer to that invention. Quote, apart, however, from the gross intrinsic improbability of the supposed recension, the utter absence of one particle of evidence, traditional or otherwise, that it ever did take place, must be held to be fatal to the hypothesis that it did. It is simply incredible that an incident of such magnitude and interest would leave no trace of itself in history, end quote. It will not do for someone to say that the argument from silence proves nothing. In a matter of this magnitude and interest, it is conclusive. Sir Frederick G. Kenyon also found this part of Hort's theory to be gratuitous. I quote, the absence of evidence points the other way. For it would be very strange if Lucian had really edited both testaments, that only his work on the Old Testament should be mentioned in after times. The same argument tells against any theory of a deliberate revision at any deliberate moment, or any definite moment. We know the names of several revisers of the Septuagint and the Vulgate, and it would be strange if historians and church writers had all omitted to record or mention such an event as the deliberate revision of the New Testament in its original Greek, end quote. Come now, is there anything mysterious about what Bergen and Kenyon stated? Is it not obvious? Please stop and think about it for a minute. The silence of history must be held to be fatal to the hypothesis. In passing, we may note that whereas Bergen was a staunch defender of the traditional text of the New Testament, Kenyon was most certainly not, being an advocate of the so-called critical text. And then there is the matter of supply and demand. Those who catalog New Testament manuscripts inform us that the 12th and 13th centuries lead the pack in terms of extant manuscripts, followed by the 14th, 11th, 15th, 16th, and 10th in that order. There are over 4 times as many manuscripts from the 13th century as from the 10th. But obviously, Koine Greek would have been more of a living language in the 10th century than in the 13th. And so there would have been more demand and therefore more supply. In other words, many hundreds of really pure manuscripts from the 10th century perished. A higher percentage of the really good manuscripts produced in the 14th century survived than those produced in the 11th century, and so on. That is why there is a progressive level of agreement among the Byzantine manuscripts, there being a higher percentage of agreement in the 14th century than in the 10th. But had we lived in the 10th century and done a wide survey of the manuscripts, we would have found very nearly the same level of agreement, perhaps 98%. The same obtains if we had lived in the 8th century, the 6th, the 4th, or the 2nd century. In other words, the surviving manuscripts from the first 10 centuries are not representative of the true state of affairs at the time. To conclude, I trust that the reader will not consider me to be unreasonable if I request that henceforth all informed persons cease and desist from calling Family 35 or KR a revision at any time. enough is enough. Down with Canards.